and welcome to the Marley Bird YouTube channel. In this video, I will show you how to make the Red Heart Fair Isle Knit Hat. This hat pattern is free at yarnspirations.com and is part of a set. You can make just the hat, or you can make just the cowl, or you can make the two together and look very fashionable as you go out this winter. In this video, I will show you everything you need to know to complete this Fair Isle knit hat. So let's go ahead, grab your pattern, grab your materials, and let's get started. When I'm making a hat, I take what the circumference is and I multiply that by 3. And I make sure that my tail is at least that long. Once I have my tail figured out, I go ahead and apply my slip knot and place my slip knot directly onto my needle. Now I'm using the smaller size of the 2 sets of needles needed, and this is a 16-inch circular needle. And I will go ahead and cast on 88 stitches. If you're like me and you lose track of the number of stitches as you're going along, you could always add a stitch marker at every 10 stitches or 20 stitches to help you keep count. So like right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I could grab a stitch marker, place it directly onto my needle, and then carry on with the cast on. Now I know that from that marker down, I do have the 20 stitches that I need. Once you have all 88 stitches cast on, it looks a little bit like this. You can see that all of the stitches have worked their way around your circular needle, and if you use the long tail cast on, you have this nice ridge that we can pay attention to make sure that our stitches are not twisted. I did put stitch markers at the 20 stitch mark as I was working them, and when I come back around, I will remove those markers. As I begin working in my 2x2 ribbing here, I don't want to forget a marker right here at the start to signify the start of my round. I can begin working my knit 2, purl 2 ribbing, and I don't have to do anything super fancy to join these 2 sides together. I am simply beginning to knit in those first stitches I cast on with the yarn coming from that last stitch I cast on. So I just knit 2 and then I purl 2. I will continue in this pattern of knit 2 and purl 2, working all of my stitches around until this piece measures approximately 2.5 inches. It's at that point that I will transition from the smaller needle to a larger needle and begin to prep for the Fair Isle pattern.
Time for a sound off. Have you knit Fair Isle before? Or maybe you've called it stranding. What was it that you made? Let me know in the comments below.
Once you've reached 2 inches or the desired width of your brim, it's time now to transition to your larger set of 16-inch needles, and we're also going to work a make one halfway through the stitches. To change needle sizes, go ahead and remove your stitch marker so it doesn't fall out. The right hand needle on the smaller set that you're working with, pull it so that it's sort of out of the way. And then grab a needle that you're working onto into your right hand. We are now going to knit 44 stitches off of the old needle and onto the new. Once you have knit 44 stitches, it's time to work a make one. A make one is a way to increase stitches without getting a hole in your work like you would get if you did a yarn over. The make one increase is done by picking up the strand of yarn right there between the stitch that's on your left hand needle and the stitch you just knit off onto your right hand needle. So you're going to take your left hand needle, and for this example I'm going to go from back to front and pick up that bar, okay? And this is the important part. If we were to knit that bar through the back leg, we would get a hole. But if we knit that bar through the front leg, the one that's the hardest to get into, okay, it's going to be hard to get into. I usually will pop it up towards the tip of my needle so I can get in there. Knit through the front leg, that's the hardest to get into. It twists the bar, and now we have an extra stitch without getting that hole. The reason we have to work the make one is because the stitch multiple for the Fair Isle section is 6 stitches. So we need to make 2 stitches total. This is the first one. We'll go ahead, knit the next 44 stitches, and I'll do a make one at the end. As you're knitting your stitches onto the larger needle, you'll notice that your needle you're knitting off of is becoming empty, and it is just going to fall away when all of the stitches are onto the new needle. This is where your old needle will become free of all of the stitches, and you will only be working with one needle. Don't forget, we have to work that last make one. So here we are, that is number 44. Here is my needle I started with, so I can go ahead and set that aside and just continue on with the needle that I just knit onto. I do want to work that make one, so I'm going to take my left hand needle. I'm going to scoop up. Let me find the bar, it's right there. Scoop up that bar. Make sure I don't split the yarn. I'm gonna knit it through the front leg and work my make one. I can take my marker and place that directly onto my needle now to signify the start of the round. I now have 90 stitches, which is perfect because the stitch multiple for the Fair Isle section is 6 stitches. So 6 goes into 90 evenly, and we can jump into the Fair Isle or the stranded pattern.
It's time to grab your pattern. We will follow along with the Fair Isle chart for this next section.
When you do Fair Isle or stranded knitting, you will be following a chart. Each square on the chart represents a stitch. So if we are to read this chart from right to left, on row 1, we can see that there are 1, 2, 3 stitches in this sort of gray color, 2 stitches in red, and then 1 stitch in gray. That only has us go across 6 stitches, which means we will go back to the right and read it again to the left. Go back to the right and read it again to the left until we get all the way to the end, at which time we will jump up to row 2. We'll go to row 2. We have 2 stitches with the gray, 4 stitches with the red. Go back, 2 stitches with the gray, 4 stitches with the red. It's really quite simple. It's sort of like a paint by number. Whenever you're supposed to use color A, you use color A. When you're supposed to use color B, you use color B. The biggest part to remember when you're doing stranded knitting or Fair Isle knitting is that you are not cutting the color each time. You're going to strand the color across to meet the new stitch that you need to get to. Let me show you what I mean. Following along with the chart, row 1 has us begin with 3 knits in this first color. Now I have to do 2 knits in my next color. So I will go ahead, drop this color, pick up my new color, and knit with my new color. Okay? Now I have to go back to the first color. So I will drop the new color, pick up my old color, and knit 1 stitch with my old color. One thing I have to remember here though is when I picked up that old color, you see that strand right there? That is the strand that goes from this stitch when I use that color to this stitch when I use the color again. It goes across the 2 stitches where I used my blue color. That strand is what I want to make sure does not get too tight. If that strand gets too tight, your actual fair isle or stranded fabric will begin to pucker. So it's important you keep that strand nice and loose. Leave it so that it is the same, I want to say make it so that the fabric is nice and flat, where the strand goes from point A to point B and there is no puckering. Everything is nice and flat the way the fabric is intended to be when the piece is all done. In order to do that, one thing that I will do is I will work in my pattern. This is where I'm repeating my pattern. So I've knit 3, and now it's time for me to knit 2 with my blue. So I'm going to have a float that goes across. What I do is I make sure that my yarn, as it's on my right hand needle, is nice and spaced out, okay? So that way when I pick up my blue and I strand it across to knit with it, see, there's my strand, it is not so tight that this fabric cannot stretch to where it needs to be. It is the same length as the stitches and nothing is puckering. Okay, does that make sense? Now I can go ahead and continue on. I'm going to pick up my gray and I'm going to knit with my gray, again making sure that that float as it goes behind these 2 blues is not too tight. Now I have started to position myself in such a way where I have the yarn one in each hand, and this to me is the best way to do fair isle knitting because it allows you to keep pretty consistent control of what color is used, and you don't have to constantly drop the yarn and readjust. Okay, so what I will do here is whenever it's time for me to knit with my gray color, I will knit it with the yarn in my left hand. When it's time for the color in my right hand, I will knit it, with the color in my right hand. Again, always making sure that these are nice and stretched out. Not stretched out, that's not the right word, but they're not all bunched up together. See how these are bunched together and these are stretched out to a point to where they're comfortable. That's the way I want the fabric to be. I just make sure that it's always that way. Now it's time for me to go back and knit with this color. Make sure those are expanded. And now I go ahead and I knit with my other color. This takes a little practice, but honestly, it will make your fair isle knitting go nice and fast, and it will help you stay really consistent. And you won't have to drop the yarn each time. I'm going to get to the end of this row so you can see how easy it is to transition from row 1 to row 4. I'm here to the end. So I'm at the end of my row and around, and I know that because I have my marker, so I just slip my marker over so it's out of the way. And now I will begin to read my chart on the second row. So this time I have 2 stitches in my gray, and then I will do 4 stitches in my blue. So this time my blue is the one that's getting more work. And then when I go back to my gray, I really want to make sure that as it floats across right there, that it does not pucker, okay? So it goes back to 2, and now I go to my blue. Usually I will hold the color that I'm going to use the most in my dominant hand, which for me when I'm knitting is my left hand, but that doesn't have to be like that. Now right there, see, I made sure I stretched out. The gray is still nice and loose, so it's not puckering my fabric, which is ideal. It is impossible with acrylic yarn especially to get any sort of stretch on your fabric if you make those floats too tight. So it's very important that you make them nice and I'm going to say loose, but make sure they're not super tight. Otherwise, your hat just will not fit. It won't be a very good feeling. All right, see how this just transitions? It's pretty seamless, and you just essentially like knit by color. Wherever the color is supposed to be worked in that row based on the chart, you do that. It's a balancing act as you're working around, making sure that you have the stitches and the floats all consistent so that your work is beautiful. Coming up to the end here, and what you will notice is row 3 is just like row 2. So you do need to be nice and careful that things don't start to pucker up on you, okay? So once again, just make sure your floats are not super tight. If you don't make sure of that, your hat will not fit. I don't know how many times I can say that to reiterate it, but I just want to make sure that you are aware. So let's take a look at the work here. Okay, so you can see that the baubles are really starting to take shape. Okay, you can see that everything's coming out really nice. And my stitches are not puckering. See how I can spread those out and nothing's pulling. It looks just like basic knit fabric. And that's because on the inside, let's take a look at the inside. My floats are not so tight that I don't have any give. See that? So I want to make sure that my floats look just like that. Pretty easy stuff. Okay, for the rest of this pattern, you will follow along with the chart through row 30. When it's time to change colors, so when I no longer want to use this blue and use my next color, I will go ahead and cut the blue, leaving a nice long tail, and rejoin my new color just like I did when I joined this blue. That's how I'll get the multi-colors of those sort of circles that we're putting on the body of this hat. Once you reach row 30, you're no longer going to be using 2 colors. You'll go back to only using 1 color, and you'll work the crown of the hat. Now, the crown of the hat is just a fancy word to say it's the top of the hat. It's the part where we will begin to decrease our stitches down so that we get to just a few stitches and can finish off the hat. The biggest thing to remember when we're doing the decreases is that there will come a point when the stitches will be too snug to go around the circular needles, and you'll have to transition to some double pointed needles. It's really not that difficult. It's just the same way we did when we moved from the larger needle to, or off of the smaller needle to the larger needle when we did the circulars. We're just going to transition and put them on double points. So let's go ahead and see how you actually will do the crown of the hat. It's really not that difficult.
Okay, I want to know how you will hold your yarn as you're doing the ferrule or stranded knitting. Will you put both colors in one hand, or try out the way I do it with one color in each hand?
Okay, flash forward. I have finished the body of the hat and I'm ready to begin my crown shaping. I have gone ahead and after round 30 on the chart, I knit just 1 full round with my main color just to bring it all even. And now I'm getting ready to jump into the crown shaping. I will show you the first round of the crown shaping with the yarn or everything on my circular needles still. And this is really basic crown shaping. We will start off with a knit 8. And then we will do a knit 2 together. So I will go into the second stitch on my left hand needle and the first stitch and then knit them together. So it's a multiple of 10 stitches here. So we knit 8 and then knit 2 together. We will do this all the way around until we get back to our marker. When you come to the end, the last 2 stitches, you will knit those 2 together. You can slip your marker, and this next row we will just knit all of the stitches around. So as you're working your crown decreases, you will do 1 round of decreases and 1 round of just knitting.